Hi, so hello from Athens, Greece. We're going to be talking about how to photograph couples in epic landscapes today, which I'm excited about. I, of course, love the business side of being a photographer. I'm a huge marketing nerd. Like that makes me really excited as well, but it's fun to do a video about photography for once because, isn't that probably the main reason that people are interested in this is the actual like going into actual epic landscapes and photographing couples. Like that is the dream. So that's what we're going to talk about, a bunch of like tips and tricks and lenses and lighting and all sorts of things. So it's going to be super fun. I'm really excited. So we'll go ahead and jump in. And if you have any questions as we go through, just go ahead and like drop them in the chat. If you'd like to see these videos live, join my Facebook group, Weddings and Wanderlust Adventure Photographers, and you can join these videos live, ask questions beforehand. Love talking and teaching about adventure elopement, so that's super fun. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So I have pulled like 3 different entire catalogs from a few recent elopements that I think showcase different types of scenery and different lens choices and really different lighting situations with couples all over the world. So we'll go ahead and jump in. I think most of this video is going to be a screencast, which is good because it's 11 p.m. here in Greece, and there's only like so much light in my hotel room, so we'll look at photos instead of me for this one. So that's gonna be super great. So let me go ahead and share my screen and let's just start. Cool. So, all right, so this elopement that I'm looking at right now was in December in Argentina. And this is a couple, it's amazing, and I'll just like scroll through it really quick so you can just get an idea for the story, and then we'll jump in and like talk about a whole bunch of different things with like lenses and lighting and how you photograph couples in epic landscapes. So some different things that I've learned over the last 10 years of doing this. So they were staying on a vineyard in the Uco Valley in Argentina. And it's amazing down there. Some of the best wine in the world comes from Argentina. This particular region is really famous for Malbecs, delicious. And it's cool because it's right near the mountain. So it's like the valley is like where all the vineyards are, but then it's right near this huge mountain range. Like we weren't even that far from Aconcagua, which is the top on that side of the Himalayas. I'd love to climb it someday. It doesn't require any technical routes. It's a really freaking long hike. So fun fact about Argentina. So cool. We took this crazy Jeep road up in the dark, up into the mountains to get to the ceremony that kind of overlooked the whole valley. But the other direction, overlooking the mountains, was even better. So they had a first look, and just super incredibly sweet. And then we took they went right into their vows right at sunrise. It was super beautiful, emotional ceremony, absolutely stunning. So they had like harsh direct light right on them, and then like the clouds got lit up, so there was like all sorts of different lighting situations going on, changing. So all these images were shot by me, like just by myself. So we'll look at like the different lenses and like how you capture this much, and variety is like a huge thing that I aim for elopements. I think a lot of photographers are, I've gotten a lot of questions. How do you capture variety when it's just you and a couple in like a spot for a day? Like how do you get variety in your images? So after they did their ceremony, they popped some champagne, and we took a bunch of amazing portraits up here on the mountain, which is great. We'll dive into this in a sec with all these different lighting scenarios, all these different lenses. And then we took like a break after we jeeped back down. We took a break in the middle of the day, took a nap. Yeah, so we jeeped back down this crazy road, took a nap. Then they did like a wine blending session in the afternoon on the winery as part of their elopement day, and made their own like vintage wedding day wine, which was freaking awesome. And then they got to cork it. That's her corking it right here. The couple's name is Sarah and Eric, by the way. Super sweet people, love them. And then it was actually my first time actually really shooting in a vineyard. because mostly I'm in like wilderness areas, but I had a blast with this because there's like beautiful mountains behind this this vineyard, and we took some photos of the vineyard, and they had this like amazing like first dance and private dinner together in the vineyard, and it was like chef cooked for them. It was, I mean, they freaking did their elopement day right, for sure. So that was their elopement day in a nutshell. So let's go ahead and dive into some kind of different tips and tricks and different lens choices. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is lenses. So that's probably the most common question I saw in the Facebook group, asking about what lenses am I mostly using for an elopement like this. So we'll make a few smart collections here to look at some different things. So let's look at what lens I was using. So let's look for how many images I shot on a 35. Ooh, that's not working. Let's look at which one of these. I can't remember which one does camera info. Focal length, there we go. That's what I was looking for. So focal length, we'll do, let's see how many we're taking with 35. And then let's look at how many were taken with a 85. All right. So we have, let's see, we have 600 photos-ish in this gallery. Let's do one more. And let's look at anything over 85, my longer lenses. Cool. So let's look at some differences here. So one thing that's interesting to me about photos and epic landscapes is how much your lens choice affects the look of what you are shooting. So it makes a massive difference, bottom line. So I pick lenses for the scenery. So let's look at these in the development. Let's pull up my camera settings here. There we go, perfect. Okay, so has my lens choice, has my settings pulled up right here. So let's talk about this, and we'll show like the original images on all of these as well. If you guys have questions or want to see originals, raws of any of these. So let's just go through this elopement day and see like what kind of different lens choices and settings choices happened throughout the different parts of the day. This elopement, I think, covers a whole bunch of different really common lighting situations that I run into. So we started in the dark before sunrise. Here I am, I handheld this photo at a 1/4 second. We've talked before about photographing couples in the dark, and I have a whole video on that, but reiterating that I like shooting typically a little bit more wide because it lets more light in the dark. And then they were getting ready outside the back of the Jeep. So I have my ISO cranked up, still shooting these with a 35 to get these photos of them getting ready outside of their Jeep, which was really fun. So they're not looking at each other. They were just like, they drove up in the Jeep in their non-wedding clothes. We had some mate while we were waiting for the sunrise, and then they changed on opposite sides of the Jeep so that they could have a first look. So we're shooting this one I grabbed my 85 is getting light enough that I could get away with about 100th of a second, shooting wide open at 1.4, still at ISO 5000. So the thing about lens choices that I think makes the biggest difference is all these images are they're all in the same scene. Let me go back to the grid here and let's look at this on kind of a bigger scale. So I'm standing in the exact same spot from this image pretty much all the way to here for their entire first look. So let's look at like what lens choices I'm using and how it looks different. So the whole scene The whole scene looks like this. So it's this big mountain range. She's walking up to him. And so I'm shooting like the wide shot to tell the story of her walking up for the first look, but I also have my 7200 as my other body. And so as soon as she gets close, I flip it vertical, zoom in, and I get that nice compression and that just tightness on that moment with them, zoomed in with my 7200, which is really one of my all-time favorite lenses to photograph couples and landscapes, which I think what I've learned from mentoring photographers and on kind of live shoots and workshops before is that I think a lot of people assume to take really effective landscape photos with couples, you can be shooting wide all the time, and are surprised to know that if I could shoot at 200 millimeters on my 7200 2.8 all the time, I would. I absolutely would. I love shooting long. I love that shallow depth of field, that compression that you get from longer lenses. And also, you know, if you look at the difference in what the mountains look like in these two frames, this one at 35 millimeters, I mean, it looks cool. You get to see all the different ridges. But when I'm super zoomed in to this couple using a different lens, that mountain range now fills the entire frame. And so lens choice makes a massive difference in how much of your frame is being filled with the landscape. And you have control over that with your lens choice, because you moving 10 feet forward or 10 feet backward isn't going to make enough of a relative difference of how close you are to the mountains. You can't move the mountains. You can't be like, oh, you're a bit too close, like move back a bit. And you can't tell them to like come closer to become bigger. Like you're in a certain location. And so when I'm considering lens choices for a location, I am picking the focal length that makes the landscape the most attractive, because I can control the distance from me to the couple. That's like the main distance that I am controlling. So if I pick a focal length that makes the landscape look amazing. So I remember shooting here and thinking that somewhere, you know, between 70 and like 85 millimeters was kind of a dream spot for, and if I was vertical, closer to like 100 millimeters, to really make the landscape look amazing. And entire first look, yeah, really found myself like reaching for those longer lenses. So picking a focal length for the lens, picking a focal length for the landscape, and then being able to say, okay, I can move and change the distance from myself to the couple to make them bigger or smaller in the frame, but I can fill the entire frame with the landscape. Of course, you don't want to shoot the entire elopement with just one single lens. You want to give variety that tells the whole story. So I'm switching between wide and tighter up to kind of give variety throughout the whole thing. So creating a variety of focal lengths like create strong diversity in diversity of images when you're shooting an elopement, and so that not all the images look the same. So let's just kind of like flick through this first look, what it ended up looking like. So she walks up to him, we're tight. The compression of that 7200 2.8 shot at 110 millimeters is really making them stand out. And here I zoom into 200 for this moment when she kisses him. I love that 7200 for moments like this, because I can give a couple space and be really far away from them. And they, you know, just don't even realize that I'm there. They're the only two people in the world. And landscape looks amazing. It's such a crisp, clear lens. I seriously am obsessed with the 7200. I will always hike up a mountain with it because it's just worth it. So for this first look, I'm just flipping between vertical and horizontal and changing up the focal length to basically capture that whole scene really just on that one lens. And then I switched it back over to my other body with the 35 because basically the sun just had peaked out. Like that pink just like between these two frames just happened. Then it was pink. It was like, oh man, now I gotta widen this out to get that pink going on. And because that glow just happened. It happened like right immediately after their first look. And then it was ceremony time. So then I shot a lot of this view during their ceremony with that 35 millimeter. So basically, what the point I'm getting at here is that long and short lenses give you a really different feeling of the exact same landscape. So here we are at 200 millimeters in the same angle in the same spot as a 35. And, you know, both images are powerful and they're part of telling the story of a couple's elopement day. And so for me, it is an absolute game changer when I started shooting onto bodies probably, I don't know, 8 years ago. I only shot on one body for maybe the first 2 years I was a wedding photographer. And since shooting on two bodies, there's just no way I would ever go back to one. Being able to get an image like this and an image like this within 2 seconds of each other and notice like he's having an emotional moment and be able to pull, you know, pick up my 7200, zoomed all the way in at 200 millimeters and take this same shot during this ceremony is pretty game changing. So, and then this lens also looking amazing even at wider focal lengths. They just had the most incredible, amazing ceremony. So I shot a lot of it tight. So wide lenses and long lenses give really different feelings, and I'm switching between them essentially throughout the entire day to capture different feelings. So like there's pros and cons of wide and long lenses here. So wide lenses, the pro of them is of course they're more open. You get kind of that big, wide, open, panoramic feel. You can really show the whole scene all at once. You can also use it in kind of tighter, narrower spaces where you don't have a ton of space to move around and really get far away from a couple. You know, so wide lenses, you know, here we go, switching back to my 35 to capture that. So the clouds just started to light up above them. And so I moved on to the other location and I ran back to the center to grab that, and I'm just moving all around constantly during this couple ceremony. Here we are back zoomed in at 200 millimeters. That same lens, I just zoomed it out to 70. The light was amazing. So wide lenses, you get that kind of wide open thing. The con of wide lenses are, unless you are really close to the couple, you are not going to get as much compression, like as much separation with depth of field from them and the landscape as you will with a longer lens. So 35 is beautiful right here, gorgeous, but you can see the difference in the depth of field from this lens. Like there's a lot of detail in these mountains back here, and so I've placed them in a part of the frame where they're not going to be you know, too distracted from that. Your eye goes right to them, using the leading lines of the horizon to lead to them, but not cut through the middle of their bodies or their heads. That's definitely a compositional no-no. Whereas this same spot shot longer, you see how much more blurred out these peaks are behind them and how much more they stand out so strongly from the background. So I absolutely love getting very far away from couples and shooting them with very long lenses to get that super tight, beautiful compression. So the con of wider lenses is that, you know, okay, see here, I'm able to get very close to them during this moment. And because I'm close to them, you know, it's all relative with depth of field. Like the depth of field, how blurred out the background is, depends on multiple factors. It depends on your f-stop. It depends on your focal length, and it depends on how close or far away you are from the couple. So if you're shooting wide and you want a shallow depth of field, get really close to your couple. If you're shooting wide and you don't want a shallow depth of field, like get away from your couple so that relatively they are closer to the landscape. All relative, essentially. So. And then I am in here, I always have that 35 on during the ceremony so that I can jump in and get these super tight close shots when they're putting on rings. So I love that moment. Super sweet. And just like that feeling of getting your ring put on your finger. It's pretty special for an elopement day. And then it's usually a quick like step back and see what else is going on with the ceremony. So we're back to that 35. So the pros of long lenses and why I like them so much is, again, you get this compression where they're just so standing out from the background due to the fact that I'm zoomed into 160 millimeters shooting wide open at 2.8. And they're now so relatively far away from the landscape that this lens just has absolutely beautiful compression. There's so much mathematics behind it all, which I won't bore you guys with today. Essentially, that kind of creaminess you get shooting wide open with a really long lens, sending far away from a couple, which is why I love this. So here I am at 95 millimeters, and I just love how creamy and out of focus this background is, and they're just like popping from it. So you are able to, I'm able to fill the frame vertically with the mountains, and you can't even see the top of the mountains here. It just feels so huge. You can, even with a smaller mountain range that's really far away, if you are zoomed into to 200 millimeters, that landscape is going, like those mountains are going to fill the frame, even if you're not that close to them. So you can kind of, I love shooting long lens. I mean, this was an epic spot, but in spots that aren't as epic, if you shoot with a long lens, that is really flattering to the landscape, essentially making a faraway mountain range look absolutely enormous. You can fill the frame, so it can make a not as epic spot look more epic if you shoot longer, because the mountains will visually fill the entire frame versus filling, you know, half the frame or a quarter of the frame, depending on how far away you are from the scene. So the con of long lenses is, no, you can't fit the entire scene when you're shooting really long, but I personally like that. I mean, I really like the close-up, intimate feel of this. I'm shooting this at 200 millimeter. I'm very far away from the couple. They are just totally engrossed in themselves in this moment. You can see how much I'm switching just between focal lengths just during the ceremony. This is all still their ceremony images. I'll skip ahead a little bit. I have some other elopements to show. This one was pretty amazing though. So you do need a bigger space in general in order to be able to utilize that really creamy compression of shooting, being far away from a couple and shooting them super zoomed in. So I jumped back in close for the wide shot of her putting on his ring, and then I knew, okay, they're gonna kiss. So that was the last piece of their ceremony. She just put on his ring. And so I already knew and had planned, picked out the spot I was going to jump back and stand and grab that like epic kiss with the 35 aligned right up, because I had, you know, been moving around and shooting all different directions of this spot for the entire ceremony. And I kind of pre-plan out, okay, where I'm going to stand and what lens am I going to shoot when they have that moment. And then again, I kind of shoot it like the first flick of, okay, grab the big wide. Half a second flat, I'm shooting with my 7200 2.8 vertically and getting all this variety, and then I can zoom in as they have all the feelings. You know, get that and that within 2 seconds of each other. Shooting two bodies is certainly a game changer, and just having a really huge variety of focal lengths. So I'd say my really two favorite lens combinations are, as you can see already, either the 35 and the 7200 2.8 or 35 and an 85, which I throw on the 85 for sure for the portraits of this couple. So amazing. We'll just like jump through a little quicker now that we've like explained that. Champagne popping. Woo. Super fun. Make sure you have a high enough shutter speed. Champagne popping. Found the cork, always find the cork, P.S. I had the Jeep driver that I told him that was his only job, to watch where the cork goes. So let's look at the way different lenses can make this whole scene look totally different. So here we are, 35. I get close to the couple for this shot, which means that these mountains back here are gonna be nice and creamy. And then, let's see. This is easier to see here, yeah. Here's a good example. All right, so here's this scene with a 35. So then now I'm standing in the exact same spot, and I can get this image at 105 for that 7200. So I'm standing in the exact same location to get both of these shots in the same place. So you get the whole thing all at once, find a couple big landscape, And then I also love the more compression, the more minimalist clean look that you get with a longer lens of that same spot. And you get all this variety, especially between horizontal and vertical, as they're doing different things and being snuggly. And the moments in between. So basically, variety of lenses is huge here. So next thing that I wanted to talk about was composition, because it's a huge deal with capturing really effective photos of couples in landscapes, is where do you put them in the frame? Before we jump in, I'm going to check out the chat really quick and see what questions you guys have. Okay. How many times have you fallen running back and forth between close and far shots? Because I'm a klutz. I am totally a klutz as well. I fall pretty much every elopement at some point. I try really hard not to fall during a couple's ceremony, so I'm just watching where my feet goes, and at the same time, like sometimes taking photos while I run. All right, another question. Do you crop your 35 images and post much? Not normally, no. I try to, cropping, I really try to pick the right lens in the moment, in general. And that's why shooting two bodies and having that instantaneous choice all the time between what focal length I'm using is huge, because when I crop in, I'm losing kind of the effectiveness of the depth of field of whatever lens I'm shooting with the more I crop in, essentially. Although cropping is important. I try to compose and crop in camera, essentially. All right, so let's talk about composition, and then I'm going to answer a few of these that I see right here a little bit later. Perfect, guys, love it. So composition, so we'll look at a few examples here, and then I'll switch to another elopement gallery and we'll look at a few more examples. So essentially there's 8 elements to composition, and composition is something I am constantly thinking about when I'm shooting these images, always thinking, going back to that kiss moment. This is a really good example compositionally of fitting a couple into a landscape. So if you notice during this ceremony, this couple starts just kind of barely just their heads lit, and it's like kind of glowy and pink. And by the time the end of the ceremony came, you know, they're getting pretty direct, pretty bright sunlight right on them. And so 8 elements of composition. So there's unity, which is essentially the idea of like, do all the parts of the composition feel as if they belong together, or is like something awkwardly sticking out? And so the choice to put this couple kind of perfectly centered under these 2 visual elements of this kind of like the shadow of the hill that they're standing on, and not mirroring the same shape of the peak behind them. When I saw that, the way the shadows were hitting the mountain, it was, okay, they're in the bright light. If I move to this specific spot, I'm going to be creating a really strong composition. So it also creates balance of that sense of like, it just feels right. It's not heavier on one side or another. Like symmetry has like a very calm feeling compositionally, whereas like asymmetrical compositions create a more dynamic feeling. So you get that difference of like, okay, here's a nice symmetrical composition, and then let's find one. Here's the same area with a more dynamic approach. Where did that one I was just on go? Yeah, so this has a more dynamic feeling to it, being asymmetrical. You get kind of movement and leading lines. Well, let's go back to that first kiss photo, because it's a good example of what I'm constantly thinking about all the time while I'm moving around and using different focal lengths. I'm always incredibly conscious of what is immediately behind the couple, and creating contrast. So we talked about movement, talked about leading lines. So there's leading lines all over the place in landscape. You just want to be conscious of where they are. So here we go. Here's the image with some leading lines. So we have all these hills creating these lines. It was kind of this X shape. If you see, there's this line here leading to them, this line here leading to them, these lines here, that line here. Basically, all of the lines in this composition are pretty much pointed right towards the couple. So it's creating a very strong, center-weighted, calm, feeling symmetrical composition using the natural lines of the landscape to draw attention. There's leading lines in this image as well. This is a really strong one, leading right to them as well. So that's kind of a leading line moment, and that's kind of the movement element as a principle of composition. Rhythm is another one of kind of those like repeated shapes and elements. So this kind of like hill feeling, you get kind of rhythm from stuff like this, kind of repeated shapes. The clouds, we're doing some cool rhythmic moments here. There's kind of repeated shapes and textures in the grass that's kind of creating rhythm in a composition, which is pleasing. And there's another one I wanted to show. Yeah, so kind of the textures in the background can create rhythm as well. And this is probably more of like a pattern, actually, which is another element of composition, so pattern. And then proportion is the last piece of like, and that's directly affected by your lens choice. So proportionally, how big is your subject in the frame? Are they huge? Are they small? Proportionally, you can play with how big is the couple compared to the landscape, depending on the lens choice you use, which is, you know, illustrated here at 70 millimeters versus what this same scene looks like at 35 millimeters versus what this scene looks like at 145 millimeters, and playing with that proportion by the lens choice. And then my favorite one, which I am constantly thinking about, is contrast, which is a really amazing way to make a couple just pop out from the background and not get busy and lost, which is why I made that mental decision to photograph this couple's first kiss like this. There's just such a strong contrast. And the focus, the focal point, which is another element of composition, there's 8 of them. So there's 8 of them. So if you're following along, it's unity, balance, movement, rhythm, focus, contrast, pattern, and proportion. We kind of have all of that going on here with strong contrast between them being severely, strongly lit up and consciously putting them, the background of them, on a shadowy part of the mountain. If I had, for example, if they were placed here in the same frame, just a small side step to the left would have made that difference. And it would have been like, they would have been on this very busy area of the frame. So I'm constantly thinking, where is the couple in the frame? What is directly behind them? I am extremely aware constantly about what are the immediate background elements all around them. Like, yes, using leading lines from the landscape to create balance and to draw the focus of the eye when you look at an image directly to the couple, but being really conscious of like what is directly behind a couple. Another thing to notice here is horizon lines. Horizon lines are another thing I'm extremely conscious of. Like, probably the 2 main things that I'm most aware of when I'm composing images of couples is what is immediately behind them. Is it a nice clean background that they're going to be standing out super strongly against? How are those leading lines pointing to them? And then what is the horizon doing? So I really hate when I am forced to cut a couple through with horizon line. As you can see from this gallery, I almost never do it. If I can avoid it, I do. I try to not, yeah, see, this is bothering me. The fact that the horizon is hitting his head right here, this image, so much better. Just having that space, and it's just a small adjustment. Probably just like got off my tippy toes for a half second. I'm short, so it's a struggle sometimes to lower the couple in relation to the horizon line. You can't move the horizon line. The horizon line is going to be where it is. You can only adjust like your perspective with the couple. So I'm constantly holding my camera over my head in order to keep horizon lines from cutting through a couple. So horizon lines, hate cutting through a couple with them. Like this image, I'm feeling like it's too tight right here to his head. This one is definitely compositionally stronger. You get that feeling of like space, like this is bothering me right there. Looking back at these, you can see I'm pretty much constantly, we go with a 35. Here's a really good example of a 35 versus, oh, that beautiful 175. I love both, but you can see I kind of take that big wide shot, get that huge feeling, and then I just love the kind of the feeling that you get from more close up tight shots. Here we go, that 85-1-4. Oh, it's so creamy, it's unbelievable. So horizon lines, I really, if at all possible, here, I remember this situation. So tips for trying to keep horizon lines through cutting through people. You either need to get high or get low. And I remember very clearly this spot, I was already on the highest point on this hill and I was already holding the camera as far as my arm reached over my head. I have that tilt LCD screen on my D750 and D850. So I'm holding the camera as high as I can above my head. I'm looking up at the LCD screen to compose it. Trying to get the horizon line from cutting through them because it was bothering me. And this was as high as I could get. So get high or get low, essentially. So I remember being like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to get low and just roll with it. So I pulled out my 35. I got really low to the ground as far as I could. Ideally, I don't want it going right through them. I remember that being a really annoying situation. I almost asked the Jeep driver to like move the Jeep downhill, but they had already been, this was towards the end of our portrait taking and they just wanted a few photos of the Jeep, so I didn't push it. But if I had had the time to do that, that would have been awesome. To get this horizon either way above them or way below them. But due to where I was parked, I was the highest part of the hill. So not cutting horizon lines through people, and horizon lines or like really strong lines of a landscape. So we've looked a ton at this elopement already, so let's switch to a different one. Let's look at this one. This is a great one to talk about horizon lines and cutting through people. So this is unique because Amber was in Patagonia with me. So some of these images are hers and some of them are mine. We don't shoot together all that often, but it very occasionally does. The she was down in South America photographing my elopement. So this couple was like, sure, come hang out. So here we go. Here we go again. So he's putting on his suit. So I'm looking at the background and I'm thinking, where am I going to place him? So the thing with this spot that we were at with this lake in Patagonia, so this is Erica and Ted, they got married in Patagonia, Chile, towards the Piney National Park. There's very strong lines going on here with this landscape. You have like these really strong shapes with the mountains and a bunch going on here. But then you have this lake. So you have this strong line happening here and another one here. So you can see throughout shooting this couple's ceremony, you know, I was getting higher on the hill behind them to get that line of the lake above them and trying to not make this line go through a part of their body that's going to make it really weird. So there's a lot of lines. This is like a challenging situation. So we were so close to the mountains here. So like I said, the con of long lenses is you can't fit the entire scene. Well, that's especially true when you are this close to the peak. So this shot is with a 35 millimeter, and it was really difficult to not cut off the top of the peaks or their feet. But I wanted to fill the frame with this scene, and I'm kind of constrained by I can't get a little bit lower because that line's going to go straight through his head. I can't move the frame up because it'll cut off their feet. So it was a lot of very carefully composed 35 millimeter shots. I remember being really annoyed because I think I cut the tip of these cuernos off a little bit. And so I don't shoot that much on a 24 millimeter, but I did at this elopement just because it was like, oh, it's a breathing room. Because this spot was just so huge. I can't communicate how massive and close these peaks were. There was not like a far away scene in the slightest. I'd say mostly in a shooting in the mountains, I have a lot of space. Like the main feature isn't like straight up in your face, but it does happen at alpine lakes. But again, I'm also shooting at this elopement with a 200 millimeter as well. So I'm, getting a variety of these close-up tight shots that, communicate the emotion. And those images, in my opinion, are just as exciting, as powerful as, capturing the whole scene, capturing all of it at once. So with horizon lines, you have a choice. You get high or you get low. And I remember being in this spot with this 35 and being like, ugh, I'm annoyed of just like cutting off the peaks or cutting off their feet. So I'm gonna get really low. You can see like the ground is in my shot here. I'm holding my camera to the ground and holding my tilt LCD and looking down at it. So those are some really big compositional elements. Like, where is this line? These really strong lines in this elopement, where are they going through the couple and making that decision and getting high? So I'm like, keep climbing the hill, like the rocks that were behind them on this hill throughout the ceremony. And I was able to get close-up shots like this one, looking back on it. Definitely not ideal, but this is going like, it's like almost chopping off her head. You really don't want to have horizon lines go through someone's neck or anywhere through their head. That try to get it low, like through the middle of their body or lower. Don't have it right at their feet, don't have it right at their headline. Like there's a few spots in the mid body that it feels okay to have a really strong line visually going through a couple, but I really try to avoid, so we have this strong line that's unavoidable, and it feels okay it being down here and there's enough space above their heads between that line, like chopping them in half, like visually. So composition is a huge issue, and this spot, I remember being challenged by it a lot due to the fact like how close it was and how strong it all was. So a couple other things I wanted to talk about. So focusing, I'm shooting in live view a lot. So I'm actually focusing in live view quite a bit. And the funnest trick with focusing in live view is you can zoom in while you're in live view. So you're holding your camera and you're in live view. I shoot on Nikon, but you can do it on Canon as well. And hit the zoom button, zoom in, and it's not gonna zoom the lens. The lens is gonna stay where it is, but it's gonna zoom in your view, like your view on your LCD. So I can zoom in all the way to the couple. So I can be back here at 24 millimeters. And how do I wanna make sure that the couple is in focus, that I'm not accidentally focusing on the lake behind them or on the mountains behind them? How do I make sure that that happens? I quickly zoom in my LCD. I do this all the time, so it's like an extremely quick process. Zoom, focus on their head, hit my back button focus. So back button focusing and using live view to focus is just game changing. So I'm staying at a certain set distance from the couple, and I'm very conscious about like, I'm not gonna move my camera forward or backwards after the situation, and the couple's not gonna be moving forward or backward after I focus. So compose the scene in live view, whether I'm holding it really high or really low, zoom in live view onto the couple, back button focus, hit the focus button on the back of my camera, which is separated from my shutter with back button focus, zoom in, so I'm zoomed in, focus, let go of the focus button, zoom back out so I can see the whole scene. I know they're perfectly in focus. I'm gonna keep my camera where it is. I'm just zooming in, focusing on them, making sure it's focused on them, and then zooming back out and making sure that I'm still aligned correctly with the scene, and then take a whole bunch of photos. And I don't need to refocus as long as I keep my camera in the same spot and the couple is staying in the same spot, especially if I'm this far away from a couple. It gets trickier if you're trying to do this with like really tight close-ups, because a tiny difference of like an inch or less can make them go out of focus. But when I'm this far away from that with a 24, that's not an issue. So I'm always back button focusing and then recomposing within reason. You can sometimes slightly, depending on how much you're recomposing and what focal length you're shooting at, you can sometimes get slightly out of focus issues with that. But I have a lot less out of focus issues than I did when I was just kind of hoping that that focal point was actually on the couple and not the camera wasn't trying to focus on the lake behind them. So that's my biggest trick with focusing and making sure a couple is in focus in a busy landscape situation. You're focusing on them, not on the background, and that it's like tack freaking sharp. Especially with landscapes where you have a lot going on. So let's talk about lighting, which is huge because you can see this elopement and the previous elopement I showed, there are lighting situations changing constantly. So like this whole beginning is, so here's their first look. So we hiked out in the dark. We've talked about photos with headlamps and hiking in the dark before. So we've done a whole live video on this. If you haven't seen it, it's on my YouTube channel or in the Facebook group. So it's just kind of like, we weren't really sure if sunrise was going to happen because it was pretty cloudy. There's a lot of clouds going on. There's some clouds like over the Cuernos here, and there's a cloud like towards the sunrise direction. It was super cold. Oh my gosh, this is so cute. He walked right up. She wanted him to sneak up on her, and so she wanted to be in a blanket so she couldn't see her dress, and then it turned around and she was like, here I am in the dress. Oh my gosh, it was so funny. Love their first look. This is Erica and Ted. Super freaking cute. And then we decided to like sit and wait. They're like, well, we'll just see. Let's just sit and wait. And then all of a sudden I was like, guys, the glow is happening. Let's do this. And they're like, yes, let's do it. So then I could see the tips were starting to glow. We didn't really know which direction it was going to go. It could have just clouded back over. But luckily it didn't. We had this like absolutely epic alpenglow happen at sunrise. Let me show you the original of this shot. So I'm making sure to not overexpose the highlights. Make sure my histogram isn't covered here. Making sure not to overexpose the highlights. That's the trick with alpenglow, is when you're in a situation like this where the background is really bright, the sun is shining directly onto this glacier and onto these peaks and onto these clouds. They are super bright. And so do not blow out the highlights when you're shooting in these kind of bright background situations. And as you can see here, it's really about pulling down the highlights and pushing up the shadows in post. And these are my presets, and I have presets for different lighting situations. You can see this is like what I'd call an alpenglow situation, which is when you have a bright background and a dark foreground, you're trying to balance it, which is tricky in editing, but I've developed a preset for it because I shoot in these lighting situations all the time. But the main idea is highlights down, shadows up for these situations, but in the raw, do not overexpose the highlights. That's the key. You can push shadows in post a lot easier than you can. Like you can bring up the shadows so easily, super easy. You can't bring back highlights that are gone, and I don't want to lose detail in alpenglow. So it got really intense. We got into some really intense alpenglow in this couple ceremony. So, I mean, they are so shot originally in the raw, so much darker than the scenery because it was so bright behind them and they were in shadow. But I knew like, okay, I can really easily bring those shadows back in post-production. Some of the more challenging ones, yeah. So I got tired of like the same composition with the horizon line being below them, so I experimented doing some with the horizon line going through them and then being on the mountains. So here I am with a 35mm. So this is the original shot. They're still completely in shadow. The mountain is still super bright behind them. And it's about like bringing up those shadows in post and balancing those super dark and super light parts of the image that are going on. And it gets even more intense later on. He had her family all record different little things like a toast for her, and it was a surprise, and he pulled out his cell phone and held it to her ear during the ceremony. It was so cute. So it's like super bright background, bright lit up mountains, balance it out with them. This is what it was like also when we were exchanging rings. So same exact thing, shot significantly down several steps on them just to make sure I'm not blowing out the highlights, because that is a tragedy that cannot be fixed. So, and then they did their first dance, which was, yeah, very much an extreme, getting very difficult to shoot in, alpenglow situation. Them so much darker than like the bright lit up mountains, but it is recoverable, especially with Nikon. Nikon has mind-blowing shadow recovery. So that's alpenglow. Let's talk about harsh light, because, let's talk about haze really quick. Someone had a question about shooting in hazy light backgrounds. So trick with haze, when you're shooting directly or nearly directly into the sun, essentially the sunlight's going to the lens and it's bouncing all around and it's lighting up the parts of the image that should be dark. So you get kind of these raw images that are flat and kind of gray, not pure. Your pure blacks are essentially gone. So with hazy images, when I'm editing them, I'm usually pulling down the black slider here to bring back in those true blacks that have been lost. So the issue is that sometimes like this will oversaturate the image. So I'm usually balancing that out by lowering the vibrance, which will lower the too saturated. A good trick though is a very small adjustment of moving the sun just slightly more out of frame can turn like a raw file like this, which is pretty gray, to something that has a lot more true blacks in it. This was like an inch or two movement of my camera just to get the sun slightly more out of my lens. Even with a lens hood on, a lot of times I'm holding my hand like at a certain angle to block the sunlight from going directly into the lens, and that helps a lot with haze. So that's a hazy situation. Move the sun farther out of the frame. A tiny difference like makes a huge effect. Use like the brand lens, like use the lens hood made by the brand for the camera, because it's specifically designed to keep out as much haze as possible without occluding the frame or creating too much of the vignette. And then, you know, pull the blacks down in post. And let's look at harsh light, which I freaking love. It's the best and so fun. You got to be able to be confident in harsh light. And it's all about where the shadows are falling. It's not the light that's the issue, it's the shadows. So this is the original raw, and the key is do not overexpose those brights. And the idea in editing is you essentially just like lower the contrast a lot. There's other things going on in my preset. My presets are a separate thing, but the general concept with editing harsh light photos is underexpose them on purpose. Don't, especially with white wedding dresses, do not overblow this. That's like pretty unrecoverable. So shoot very dark and then pull up the blacks in post, lower the contrast, essentially, is the idea with harsh light. So basically exposed for the brightest part of the image, which in all of these is for sure going to be her dress and the glacier and the clouds. So here's a good example of using leading lines and like being really conscious of what scenery am I putting directly behind the couple? Where are those horizon lines going through them? How is the light hitting them? Here we go with some more harsh light images. If a couple is like fully lit up with the light, you know, you can make harsh light. That was the original. That's the raw, like look, not too shabby, pretty creamy actually. So it's the original. So yeah, it's a high contrast situation when you're shooting in harsh light. Like the lit up parts of the side of them is very, very bright. The shadows are very, very dark. So you need to lower that contrast to kind of balance them out in post with harsh light. So I'm going to show just a few more. So we have this like dynamic asymmetrical compositions using like the shapes of the mountains and placing the couple in a very specific spot using the harsh light to create contrast. Your eye is automatically drawn to them as the focal point of the image. just kind of conscious of all the time, and I'm constantly moving to make sure that I like where the couple is falling in relation to the mountains, like where are they ending up. All right, so I'm gonna check the chat for questions. Who's got questions? Okay. Mention beautiful leading lines compositionally. Do you position them when you get to the location for best composition, or let them pick where they want to stand? So essentially, I give them options. I say, you know, I give direction, I showcase my expertise of like, okay, this whole scenery, you know, which view do you like the best? Okay, like if you want that view, like stand anywhere on the edge of this ridge here, and that would be beautiful. So like walk around and figure out like what feels like your spot. And then wherever they are, I can move and adjust accordingly and compose the way I want to make the leading lines work out with the situation. So do you happen to move them into that light, or did that happen on its own? So I think you're talking about Sarah and Eric's first kiss. I could see that light happened right at the beginning of their ceremony. And so I knew that anywhere that they would stand on the edge of that ridge there, the top of them would be lit up. So it was pick anywhere here, but I knew anywhere they picked, I'd have that like top of them lit up, and I'd be able to use that as a contrast mechanism. Do I use a lot of filters, polarizers, neutral densities? I'm so glad you asked that question, because I forgot to mention that. Yes. I don't really ever need it on my 72 to 200 2.8 because I'm only at a 2.8, but in these situations where I'm shooting with an 85, you can see I'm maxed out 1/8,000th of a second. I'm shooting really wide open, and 85, 1.4, I'm at the lowest ISO possible, and it's still too bright. So I have a 1 1/3 stop neutral density filter, which is like sunglasses for my camera lens, to make sure that I can not blow out her dress here, because it was pushing it already. I did not want to blow it out. So yeah, ND filters are great for alpenglow situations, harsh light situations, especially when you want to shoot wide open. Those really bright situations. 8,000th of a second helps on the D850, but I still use ND filters on it. The D750 only goes to 1/4000, so I'm certainly using ND filters on a D750. You ever like couples with off-camera flash? No, hardly ever, because I'm pretty much exclusively shooting outdoors. I like couples externally with headlamps. Does that count? I use flash indoors, like bounce it off walls if I need to. But that's not really off camera. That's just not my area of expertise. When your presets go back on sale, they will go back on sale later this year. I'm restructuring them and I'm selling them individually with individual videos on each lighting situation instead of all at once, because a bunch of people wanted that, and I think that's a great idea. So I'm repackaging them and releasing them later this year. Being that the light is constantly changing, are you using auto white balance or continue checking white balance? Auto white balance, my opinion, is the way to go. When you're shooting in RAW, white balance is something that's very easy to change in post. Sorry if you're on the Kelvin train. I shoot auto white balance, personal preference. So shooting auto white balance in all these different lighting situations means that it's one less thing for me to have to think about. And with these, really high quality RAW files, it's, in my opinion, not quite as necessary to get it perfectly right in camera. So I'm manipulating these quite a bit in post, the beauty of digital. Cool. Any other questions? This has been great. I thought it would be a little bit difficult to teach this while sitting in a dark hotel room in Greece, but hopefully this is showing a lot. So here we go, like another composition, making sure that this line was not going through them, make the landscape look beautiful. And I knew, like, okay, if they're gonna walk along the beach here, I'm gonna have them say, hey, like when you guys like start on that other side of the beach, walk towards me. And I knew when they got to that spot, they'd be in the right location. So I'm kind of having foresight all the time, being behind a couple. Oh my gosh, the wind was so strong here, guys. Look at this. It was seriously like 90 miles an hour in this location. Cool. Details. Details, fun. All right, let's show just a few from one more elopement. Yes. And let's look at this one. Yes. I'm gonna need to plug in my computer, guys. It's nearly dead. Myself might get slightly darker when I do this because I have a lamp on. So sorry about that. I need to plug in so I don't die. That would be a problem. Okay, so this is another South America elopement. This one's in the Atacama Desert. Here we go with that creamy 85. You can see sure shooting this big wide canyon location, kind of like a massive, massive Moab. Like the Atacama is so huge, it's massive. So I can get those type of shots with an 85, and then, you know, getting something wider that's filling more of the scenery with a 35. And sometimes occasionally putting the scenery in focus and making the couple out of focus is fun as well. It's another fun way to adjust. So here's a really good example of, okay, sweet, this is a great landscape image with my 85. Get even wider with a 35 and be able to put them on it and make sure I'm not overblowing the brights because the sun is hitting them directly in this shot. Super fun. Love it. So shooting, it's an 85, getting that super creamy, dynamic depth of field. Shooting with a 35, getting a little bit of a wider scene in a really, really bright, harsh light situation. That was the original raw. So a few other questions that people had. How to talk to couples when they're super far away. I talk loudly, I'd say, a lot of the time. And it's, you know, being in a location where there's nobody else, you're not bothering anyone by talking kind of loudly, and you don't even have to talk that loud if it's really quiet. So even if I'm way far away, standing away from a couple, I can give direction most of the time. It's when I am more than a couple hundred yards away from a couple or in a location with really loud ambient noise like a waterfall that I use a walkie-talkie to give direction to a couple. A few things about a session with a couple in general. I really want couples to feel as comfortable as possible in front of a camera. I have a whole like posing strategy of getting a couple into the mood of feeling really truly safe to be themselves and super relaxed, that I've developed like from experience with yoga and energy work and meditation, and just being a introverted camera shy person myself. That's a whole nother topic that I'd love to go into, but I'm already past an hour and we're talking about kind of more landscapey stuff today. But one good tip about that though, to help a couple feel more comfortable throughout a session, is I don't take close-up wide shots of a couple really normally until the end. I think starting off a session, standing far away and shooting more long lenses at the beginning really helps a couple feel a lot more comfortable and feel like it's a natural experience for them versus being in their face with a 24 or a 35 straight off. So that's like one kind of tip from my posing and directing strategy that I call permission posing, which I will talk about at a different point. So getting variety on all of these elopements were 2-person all day, somewhere between 12 and like 24 hours of coverage elopements. How do you get variety? You get variety in focal length, vertical, horizontal, and by moving around constantly and shooting in different directions and capturing different parts of the same scene. That's one of the reasons I like shooting long, is because in a couple moves, I'm getting a different piece of landscape, and it helps give more variety through a whole gallery. Around a ton, shoot 2 bodies with 2 different focal lengths, kind of see actions before they happen. So know, okay, the couple's gonna run down this hill, so I'm gonna be proactive, run down below them and shoot on some of these, but as they run past me, they'll be backlit and I'll get shots more like of thinking constantly. Logistics and safety. Someone asked about how you keep couples safe. I'll obviously have a really super robust clause in your contract talking, making sure that you're covered liability wise, but obviously you don't ever want to get a couple into that situation in the first place. So always ask for permission. Be extremely careful with language when you're directing couples. I use language like, only if it feels safe and comfortable. Why don't you guys walk close, towards the edge, go only as far as you feel comfortable. Do you think it would be fun to take a few shots over there near the edge? And leave it completely open and say, if not, no worries. Like, there's a cool spot over here that's nowhere near the edge. Like, let them have the choice and don't ever get a couple in a situation in the first place. So here's some good examples of different focal lengths, different lighting situations, how it makes this scene look totally, totally different. So we have 86 millimeters, 125 millimeters. I'm getting low, getting the horizon above them, and then holding the camera high, getting it above their head. I was definitely holding my camera over my head for these shots. I remember that quite clearly, trying to get them low in the frame and the horizon above them, shooting in harsh light. Here, had some questions about gear. I had a whole video about hiking elopement logistics and gear to check out. If you want to know how I get to these places and what gear I'm carrying and what camera and non-camera gear that I have with me. So here's another ceremony. Their ceremony was at sunset. They were surrounded by volcanoes. And so the scene looks super different here at a 35 with like all this texture and all these plants. So incredible. And then, tight on them with like a volcano filling the frame behind them at 200 millimeters. Just love the variety with that. So, all right. Any other questions? Tips for shooting in harsh light. Do not overexpose the highlights. Shoot them underexposed, and then bring them back in post-production. Use a neutral density filter if you need to, if it's too bright with you shooting wide open. Be mindful of where the shadows are. It's not the light that's the problem, it's like unflattering shadows. You have a couple turns that turn their faces towards the direction of the sun, it often helps with that situation. Do I send them another question, do I send them pictures of just landscapes as well as their elopement shots? Absolutely, I send landscape shots for sure. Those love landscape shots of their elopement day locations. I absolutely take landscape shots throughout the day. So, all right, any other questions? I think I'm about wrapped up, guys. I think I covered everything that was asked in the Facebook group as far as questions. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful to give some kind of tips on composition and lens choice and lighting and focusing, and some fun tips of how to effectively capture both couples and landscapes really dynamically. Any other questions? You guys are awesome. Thanks so much for jumping in. If you want to watch one of these videos live in the future, join my Facebook group, Weddings and Wanderlust. And it was great seeing you guys, and I'll see you in the Facebook group. All right, ciao. Have a great day. Bye-bye. It's like past midnight here in Athens, so I'm gonna sign off, guys. Hope you're doing well. Talk to you later.